Welcome back. In this video, we're finally going to cover user interaction. So if someone clicks a button or types a new search string in the search field, we should be able to do something in JavaScript based off of that. To kick things off, what we're going to do is run two instances of live server at the exact same time. We're going to keep the one for the To-Dos app up and running. And over in my terminal, we're going to create a new tab and run it again for the Notes app so we can stop switching back and forth. Now, if you're on Windows or Linux, you might need to create a new window. If you're on Mac, you can create a new tab using Command T. And in here, we're going to run live server. And we're just going to use the other application. So I already have the To-Dos app running. Over here, I'm going to run the Notes app. Now it is going to see that that port is already taken, so it's going to assign it a brand new port. Here I can see that my Notes app is running on port 51880, and my To-Do app is running on 8080. This is going to make it way easier to switch back and forth. Now I'm going to crack open the Notes app index.html and JavaScript files. And I'm going to put those files first, and I'll keep the To-Do files second. So to kick things off, let's go ahead and create our very first thing the user can actually interact with. Down below our last paragraph, what we're going to do is create a button. To make a button, we use the button tag. So I'm going to use the less than sign button. I'm going to close it off, and then what goes inside of this tag is the button text. So for the Notes app, we are going to have a button that allows the user to add a new note. So right here, I could say something like create note. Now, if we go ahead and save our HTML file, we should see over here the button showing up, and it is indeed showing up. We got a little button. We can click it. Currently, it doesn't do anything, but having the button in place is the first step. Let's go ahead and open up the developer tools. I'm going to leave the console open throughout the rest of the course. And what we want to do now is figure out how we can respond to that button click, but inside of our JavaScript file. To get this done, we're going to be using event handlers. So there are a lot of different events we can listen to. An event is something that the user does. An event might be clicking a button or hovering over a paragraph or scrolling on the screen. All of these events you can attach event listeners to. An event listener is nothing more than a function to run when the event happens. So I could say, hey, when someone clicks this button, run this function. And that's exactly what we're going to set up. Let's go ahead and do just that over in our notes.js file. Over here, I am going to delete all of the stuff we have so far. This was great when we were messing around with those features, but they're not actually going to make it into the final version of the application. The first thing we have to do is query for the element we're trying to attach the event listener to. In this case, we're trying to run a function when that button gets clicked, so we are going to use query selector to get access to that button. Right here, document.query selector. We're going to access that button. And then what we're going to do is use a method called add event listener. That is .add event listener. This is how we attach an event listener, and it takes two arguments. The first is a string, and that's where you put the event name, like click or mouse up or change. And the second argument is the function to run when that event happens. So let's explore a quick example before I show you where the documentation lives. Right here, I'm going to call it. I'm going to pass in the first argument, which is a string, and we can see a whole bunch of different examples down below that Visual Studio Code is giving us. There are so many things that we can listen for. There are touch-based events, there are click-based events, there are drag-based events, copy events. In this case, we're going to stick with a very simple one, click. When someone clicks that button, we are going to run some function. So that's the first argument, the event we're listening for. The next thing we do is we provide the function. This is the function that runs when the event fires. Inside of here, for the moment, let's just print a message to make sure the function actually fires. So console.log, did this work? So we should only see the did this work message after clicking the button. Now, if I save the application and head over to our browser, what do we get? We get a single message in the console, live reload enabled. This is not coming from our code. So as of now, this function has not executed. Why hasn't it executed? Because no one's clicked the button we attached the event listener to. If I do go ahead and click this button, what happens? We get our did this work message printing. If I click anywhere else on the screen, like our paragraphs or our other markup, nothing prints. It's only when we click the button. If I click it 2 more times, what do I get? I get a few more messages. And when you see the same message twice, Firefox, Chrome, and other browsers will just stack them. So here it's saying that the same message was printed 4 times in a row. If I click it again, that number gets bumped up to 5. So there we have it. We now know how to do something in JavaScript when someone interacts with the web page we've set up. Before we go any further, I want to take a few minutes to pull up the documentation for this method, since there are a lot of different options for that first argument. We can find this by Googling MDN, add event listener. As always, it's really the only set of documentation I recommend for JavaScript. If we click over here, we can take a little peek at exactly what arguments it takes. And we just saw that it takes a type and a listener. When you see arguments and you see them in square brackets like this, that means those arguments are optional. We're going to ignore all other arguments for now and just focus on the required ones, which are the listener, the function we already set up, and the type. In that case, we used click. Now, the reason I brought you here is because on the left-hand side, we have an events section. This shows you all of the different events you can listen for. We have things like click, which we explored, and we have others like double click, which means you just click twice. And if you actually go to that page, it gives you a bit more information about when this type of event would fire. Now, some events, it's pretty clear when they would fire, but what about another event? An event like, for example, key down. Key down fires when someone presses a key down and you're listening for that, which can be pretty useful for text-based input fields. We also have other events related to mouse movement. Before we explore any different events other than click, what I want to talk about is an argument that's actually passed to your callback function. Whenever you're listening for an event, regardless of whether the event is click, mouse up, or any other event out there, you get your callback function, your listener, called with an argument. This argument represents that event, so it gives you information about exactly what event happened and why. So this is really useful for us. Let's explore just why. Right here, we're going to name this. Now, you'll see this in JavaScript commonly called event, or the shorthand E. Well, E isn't a great variable name because it's not super descriptive. It's so common that it actually serves its purpose just fine. For the moment, all we're going to do is just dump E to the console and explore it. Console.log E. Now, when we print E, we're going to see just an overwhelming amount of information. And as with most of the things we've seen so far, while there is a lot of information, there's really only a few things that we're going to end up using. For example, if I expand this, we can see there are maybe 30 different properties, and some of them are useful, others not so much. For example, do I really care what the coordinates were of the button that were clicked? In almost all situations, the answer is going to be no. But there are some interesting things here. The most interesting thing is the target. The target is actually a representation of that DOM element. So just like we can get the element back from query selector, we can get the element that the event was fired on right here from e.target. That means we could do whatever we want, like change the text of the element. For example, right here, I could say e.target. This gives me the element. How do we change the text of an element? We use text content. So .text content. And now I'm going to set a new value for the button's text. The button was clicked. If I go ahead and save the Notes app JavaScript file and go back to the browser, we can see we have create note. I click the button and we can see the button text switches over to the button was clicked. So the e-event argument is useful when you want to do something with the element that the event actually fired on. Now, I have a lot more to say about events and other elements we can add into our markup, but for now, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. We'll continue the discussion in the next video. Your challenge for this one is going to be to add a new button to the to-do markup. You're going to have this button with some text, something like add to do. And you don't have to worry about having an input field where the user can actually type that text. We'll get to that later. For now, we just need a button. And in your JavaScript, I want you to add a click listener for that button. And you just need to print a message to the console, something like, I'm adding a new to-do. So take some time to add that button, add your click listener, print a little message, and then test it all out by saving your work and clicking the button in the browser. Then come back and click play, and we'll go through the process together. All right, how'd that one go? I'm going to kick things off by adding that button right here. Then I'm going to give it some text. I will use add to do, and then we're going to add an event listener to it. Now, if we put the button here, all of the to-dos that we create are going to end up being below the button. What if we want the button below the to-dos? Don't worry, we'll get to that in a little bit. For now, we're not going to worry about the specific order. We have our button in place, and we're going to add an event listener. I'm going to add the event listener at the bottom of this file. Right here, I'll leave a little comment, listen for new to-do creation. And then I'll add my code. That's going to be, first up, a call to query selector to find that button. Now, if you're asking, what if I have 5 buttons? How do I target a specific one? We'll talk about that in just a few videos as well. For now, though, document.query selector is going to allow us to query for the first button we see. And we're going to use what? The add event listener method. What event are we listening for? In this case, we're listening for a button click. And what are we trying to do when that happens? In this case, we're just printing a message. Now, you could set up the E argument for all of your events. I typically do this, although it's not required to name it unless you're going to use it. In this case, I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to be printing a static message to the console. Console.log, right here, add a new to-do. Perfect. So this is a little placeholder for the real functionality, which will come a bit later. Now we can go ahead and save our file. I can switch over to the to-do application, crack open the console, and see if we get the correct results. Right here, I have my web console with my little live reload message. If I click my button, I do get my message, add a new to-do. Click it again, I get the message again. So there we have it. In this video, we learned that when we have access to a specific element, we can add event listeners by providing the event we want to listen for and the code to run when the event actually happens. In this case, we provide code to run when the first button on our page gets clicked. That's where we're going to stop for this one. We know the basics of events, but there's still a lot more to uncover. Let's go ahead and move right into the next video where we're going to continue to talk about handling user interaction. I'll see you then.